All right, so everyone's talking about it right now. Russia firing an ICBM. Like, it's the kind of news that makes you just stop and think, wait a minute, is this really happening? And yeah, we're going to get into all of that today, what exactly happened, why it's such a big deal, and what it could mean for, all of us. But before we do that, we have to make one thing absolutely clear. This is not just some, hypothetical scenario we're talking about here. This is the first time ever that an ICBM has been used in actual combat.
Yeah, it's a moment that I think has the potential to change the rules of warfare, as we know them. I think to really understand how serious this is, it's important to understand what an ICBM actually is. So an Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, specifically designed to travel huge distances, like over 5,500 kilometers. Imagine launching something from New York and having it land in Los Angeles. That's the kind of range we're talking about.
Wow. So we're not talking about your average missile here. I mean, these things were built for one main reason, to deliver nuclear weapons. And until now, the world has kind of held its breath, hoping that day would never come.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the sheer destructive power of ICBMs, especially when they're armed with nuclear warheads. They made them the ultimate deterrent during the Cold War. Like, the whole idea of mutually assured destruction was built around this fear that using one would trigger this, a catastrophic global response, basically wiping out civilization as we know it.
Yeah, it's terrifying to even think about. But thankfully, in this case, the ICBM fired by Russia, it was an RS-26 Rubezh, launched from the Astrakhan region. It was carrying a conventional warhead, not a nuclear one.
That's right. It traveled over 1,000 kilometers, targeting infrastructure in Dnipro, Ukraine. And while Russia hasn't said anything about it, Ukraine has confirmed the attack.
So conventional warhead or not, why is this causing such a global panic? Is it just a type of missile? Or is there something more to it?
Well, I think it's about breaking a taboo. For decades, ICBMs have been seen as these weapons of last resort, their use almost unthinkable because of the potential for escalation. And by using one in this conflict, even with a conventional warhead, Russia has crossed a line. A line that a lot of people thought would never be crossed.
Right. It's like opening a door that everyone agreed should stay closed.
Exactly. And that's why this event is causing so much concern and, uncertainty. It makes us ask some really serious questions about the future of warfare and the stability of, these international norms.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And to make things even more complicated, Russia didn't just launch any ordinary ICBM. They use a technology that makes this event even more unsettling. MIRV technology.
Yeah, that stands for Multiple Independently Targetable Reentry Vehicles. Basically means one missile can release multiple warheads, each one capable of hitting a different target.
Oh, wow. So it's not just one massive explosion, it's multiple strikes happening at the same time.
Exactly. And that makes defending against this kind of attack much, much more difficult. Because you're not dealing with a single incoming threat, but a whole bunch of them, each with its own trajectory and its own target.
Wow. Now, I remember reading that MIRVs were a major escalation point during the Cold War arms race. Did it essentially make ICBMs even more terrifying?
Absolutely. It amplified the destructive potential of these weapons, raising the stakes of a potential nuclear conflict to unimaginable levels. And now, seeing this technology being used in a conventional conflict, even on a smaller scale, it's deeply unsettling to a lot of world leaders.
Right. So are we essentially witnessing a similar kind of escalation now, but with conventional weapons instead of nuclear ones?
That's the question a lot of people were asking. And the answer isn't really clear-cut. But what we can say for sure is that this event has introduced a very dangerous new element into the equation.
And on top of the MIRV technology, there's another thing that makes this situation even more complex. The fuel used in the Rubezh missile.
Right. The Rubezh is a solid-fueled ICBM, which has some serious implications for its readiness and deployment, unlike liquid-fueled missiles, which need to be fueled right before launch. Solid-fueled missiles are basically ready to go at a moment's notice.
So if you see one on a satellite image, it's basically ready to fire. That seems like it would make it much harder to react in time.
Exactly, and that's what makes solid-fueled ICBMs so much more difficult to track and potentially more destabilizing in a conflict, because they add this element of surprise and reduce the time for any kind of diplomatic intervention.
Right, so basically, you don't know where they are, and when you do see them, they're pretty much ready to launch.
Yeah, that's a pretty fair assessment. And to add to all of this whole thing with Russia, it's not happening in isolation. We need to consider the bigger picture here.
Right. You're talking about India's recent test of the Agni 5.
Right.
I read that it's also a solid-fueled ICBM. And they're adding MIRV technology, too.
Exactly. And that's a really important piece of the puzzle here. We're not just looking at one isolated event, but a potential trend. This technology is spreading to other countries. And that raises some serious questions about the future of arms control.
It's like everyone's looking at what Russia's doing and thinking, well, if they can do it, maybe we should too.
Yeah, it's a dangerous dynamic. If countries feel like they need to match their rivals or even surpass them, it could lead to a new arms race, similar to what we saw during the Cold War, but potentially even more volatile, given all the advancements in technology.
Right. So where do we go from here? I mean, this is all pretty intense stuff. What's the takeaway for our listeners, the people trying to understand all of this?
Well, I think the most important thing to understand is that this event has consequences that reach far beyond Ukraine and Russia. We're talking about potential changes in the global balance of power, new security concerns, and the erosion of norms that have helped prevent large-scale conflicts for decades.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even if a conflict seems far away, it can still have a big impact on our lives, whether it's through the economy, political instability,
Right.
or just this constant feeling of fear and uncertainty.
And it highlights how important it is to stay informed, to engage in these difficult conversations, and to hold our leaders accountable.
Yeah, we can't just ignore this and pretend it's not happening. We have to be active in shaping the future. And that starts with understanding the complexities of the challenges we face.
Absolutely. And that includes understanding the connections between technology, political decisions, and human behavior. We're living in a world where the lines between conventional and nuclear warfare are becoming blurrier, and where the potential consequences of miscalculation are greater than ever before.
Yeah, it's like we're walking on a tightrope, and one wrong step could send us all tumbling down.
And it's not just about avoiding disaster. It's also about seeing the opportunities we have to build a more stable and secure world. This event could be a wake-up call, a chance to start new conversations about arms control, disarmament, and conflict resolution.
So there's a glimmer of hope in all of this.
Always. Human history shows us that we're capable of both incredible destruction and remarkable resilience. It's up to us to choose which path we want to follow.
That's a powerful thought. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's one question you'd like our listeners to think about? Something that will stay with them, even after this episode is over.
I think the most important question we need to ask ourselves is, now that this ICBM taboo has been broken, what does that mean for the future of warfare and global security? Will this lead to a new era of unchecked military escalation? Or could it be a catalyst for renewed efforts towards peace and disarmament? And it's not just the speed either. You see, these missiles don't need to be fueled up right before launch, which also makes them more mobile. They can be moved around and launched from different places, making them even harder to find and take out before they can fire.
So it's a pretty scary situation for anyone trying to defend against them. You never know where they are, and when you do finally spot one, it's basically ready to go.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And there's another thing that makes this whole situation even more worrying. This isn't just some isolated incident with Russia. We need to look at the bigger picture.
You mean like India's recent test of the Agni 5?
Right.
That was a solid-fueled ICBM, too.
Was nuts.
And I think I read somewhere that they're adding MIRV technology to it as well.
Exactly. That's a key part of this whole puzzle. It's not just one event. It could be the start of a trend. This technology is spreading to other countries, and that really makes you think about the future of arms control.
It's like everyone's watching what Russia is doing and thinking, hey, if they can get away with it, why can't we?
It's a dangerous game. If countries feel like they need to keep up with their rivals, or even get ahead of them, it could easily trigger a new arms race, like what we saw during the Cold War. But this time, it could be even more dangerous because of how much technology has advanced.
So what can we do about it? Where do we go from here? This is some pretty serious stuff. What should our listeners be taking away from all of this?
Well, the most important thing to understand is, what happens over there doesn't stay over there. This event has consequences that go way beyond Ukraine and Russia. We could see changes in the global balance of power, new security threats, and the weakening of the rules that have helped to prevent major wars for decades.
So even if a conflict seems far away, it can still affect us all, whether it's through the economy, political instability, or just that constant feeling of fear and uncertainty.
Exactly. And this is why it's so important to stay informed, to talk about these difficult issues, and to hold our leaders responsible.
We can't just bury our heads in the sand and pretend this isn't happening. We have to be active in shaping the future. And that starts with understanding the challenges we face.
Yeah, absolutely. And that includes understanding how everything is connected, the technology, the politics, and human behavior. The lines between conventional and nuclear warfare are getting blurry, and the risks of miscalculation are higher than ever.
That's like walking a tightrope. One wrong step, and we all fall.
That's a good analogy. But it's not just about avoiding disaster. It's also about recognizing the opportunities we have to create a safer and more secure world. This event could be a wake-up call. It could push us to have new conversations about arms control, disarmament, and how to resolve conflicts peacefully.
So there's some hope in all of this, then?
There's always hope. Human history shows us time and time again that we're capable of incredible destruction, but also amazing resilience. The choice is ours. Which path will we choose?
That's a powerful thought. So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's one question you want our listeners to really think about, something that will stay with them after they finish listening?
It really makes you think. Now that this ICBM taboo has been broken, what does that mean for the future of war and for global security as a whole? Will this just lead to more and more countries using these weapons? Or could it actually be a chance to push for peace and disarmament?
Yeah, it's a heavy question for sure. We've talked a lot about the strategic and political side of things. But what about the human cost? The fear, the uncertainty, just the thought of living under the threat of these incredibly destructive weapons.
That's a crucial point. We can't ignore that. Using an ICBM, even with a conventional warhead, it brings back all those fears about nuclear war. It reminds us of the darkest days of the Cold War, when the world was so close to destroying itself.
It's like a collective trauma resurfacing, this reminder of how vulnerable we are in the face of such overwhelming power. And it's not just about the physical danger. It's the erosion of trust, the division it creates in societies, and the way violence starts to feel normal.
Exactly. And that's why I think we need to broaden the conversation. It can't just be about military strategy and geopolitics. We need to talk about the ethics of these technologies, the psychological impact on people and communities, and the long-term consequences for humanity.
We've created these incredibly powerful weapons, but do we really understand what we've unleashed? Are we ready to handle the responsibility that comes with them?
Those are questions that every country, every leader, every person needs to ask themselves. We can't just leave it to the experts and the politicians. This is about our collective future, our survival.
And it's about understanding that true security doesn't come from having more weapons or building bigger walls. It comes from fostering understanding, building connections, and addressing the root causes of conflict.
It's about shifting our mindset from fear and competition to cooperation and shared responsibility. We need to recognize that we're all connected and that our fates are intertwined.
So in a way, this event, as terrifying as it is, gives us a choice. We can either keep repeating the same patterns of fear and aggression, or we can see this as a chance to forge a new path, a path towards a more peaceful and just world.
It's a choice that requires courage, wisdom, and a deep commitment to our shared humanity. And ultimately, it's a choice that each and every one of us has to make.
That's a powerful message to end on. We hope this deep dive is giving you all some things to think about, some new perspectives, and maybe even a renewed sense of urgency about the challenges we face. Remember, the future isn't set in stone. It's shaped by the choices we make today, both individually and together. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive and this deep dive